so by the writer, and it's interpreted by the reader or the viewer or anyone. The player is a creator too. So we as game authors and game designers, game writers, must just provide them the tools to write their own story. So we must get rid of this complete control over everything so they can write their own story. If we can want to provide them with a story, that's cool too. We can do it. And as you said, most of the games that I've written have a strong story behind it. But I must always bear in mind that the narrative, or I want to call it inherent narrative. Why do I call it inherent narrative? Because it's always there. There's a lot of animals that play. You know, cats play, dogs play, even birds play. But as far as I know, human beings are the only ones that tell stories while they play. You play when you're a kid and you disguise yourself. And you're telling yourself the story that you were a pirate, you were a princess. So you're already creating narratives while you play. You're creating narratives while you are playing chess, for example, and it's the narrative of how I beat you or you beat me. These are narratives. On football, for example, sports, broadcasted sports, they have a very strong narrative that is exactly the match itself being broadcasted by the speakers, and they are creating strong narratives. So let's go for the definition. Emotion narrative is the one that being inherent to the act of playing. So every time that you play, you create a story. Creates narrative discourses, that is a story, by means of real-time interactions of the player and her environment. Sorry, I use her. I don't want to use his. This is much simpler, but it's also for male players, of course. With the game mechanics using immersion processes. So let's go step by step. Inherent to the act of playing creates narrative discourses. That's what we said. We create stories as we play, while we play. Real-time interactions with the player and environment. We will go to it a bit later. And using immersion processes. This is very different. So immersion means that I am there, and I do that. When you're watching a movie, there's someone that is doing things, and is being there, this is the main character, and then you relate to those feelings. That is called vicary, or it's called identification. But you don't feel. She feels, and then you feel what she feels, what she tells you to feel. In games, you don't need that. You can have that, but you don't need that. You can feel just by yourself, because you are there, and you are doing that. For example, everything takes place within the game mechanics. Let's go for Tetris. Which mechanics do we have? Some of them are controlled by the developers. The game space, the blocks that fall. If a row completes, it disappears. If an empty space is left below, the level of row rises up. If the player completes a given number of rows, the level is complete. And if the row number ascends to 20, goes up, 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 then you lose. Okay. And what can the player control? Just moving the block or rotating it, left or right. Okay. There are some other advanced game mechanics that help us create stories. For example, if the row level rises, we feel stress. And stress is a powerful emotion that can help us create stories. If a lot of, the S or Z shapes that always fuck you when you're playing Tetris, if there are 5 of them, then you start to feeling, this is not just. I mean, the world is not just. This is creating a narrative within you. So things are not being as they should be. I have my expectations of how this story should go, and things are going to hell. So if you put a block where you didn't want to, then you start to feel confused, and also things are not going okay. And if you complete a level when you're almost dying, that's epic, guys. You feel like the hero saving the day at the very last moment. That's Bruce Willis for you. This is when you feel really important. And you're creating that story. But of course, there are some other changes in the game mechanics that can be controlled by the player, but that are not put there by the developers. When you, for example, decide, I have lateral dyslexia, which means that I do not understand left and right. So when I want to go left, I go right, and so what happened to me with Tetris is that I decided that I would only rotate to the left. Because if I wanted to rotate to two sides, it was complete crap for me. The devs never imagined that. So that created a new game mechanic for me and a new story. Then two players can cooperate. I wrote a game, a small game, 2 years ago, sorry, where you are controlling two soldiers that are shooting side by side to all the zombies again that are appearing all sides of the screen. That is for mobile. So the player was supposed to be, to be touching everything with his two fingers. But then we found out that many players wanted to play it in couples. So with some other friend that was creating, that was a new narrative. The new narrative was not how I beat the zombies, but how we beat the zombies. Now we have two main characters instead of just me. And some other game mechanics, how you just control the environment. Someone greets the player while you're playing, and then someone says, hey, hello, how are you? And say, I'm playing, don't stop me. So that is interfering with your narrative, and something else is coming. The lights go out, you need to visit the private, because, but you're playing, and that creates an important narrative too. Someone helps you. Can you please help me pass this level? Because I cannot. That is introducing a new narrative in the game too. So, for example, let's read some story that happened to me, that I created while playing Tetris. I complete the first 14 levels as a pro, but then my mobile phone rings, not phone, but phone, rings, and I lose my concentration and put a block in the wrong place, and then the roll level raises a bit, but I managed to complete the levels without many problems. Right, I'm great. The following 5 levels are really easy, and I even managed to complete 6 combos of 4 blocks, but then the son of a bitch starts to throw only S and Z shapes. So I have no way to complete a single line. What's more, I start to feel the urge of visiting the private, so I'm just 1 line away from failing the level when I manage to put a block in the right place and complete 3 lines in a row, then 2 more, then 1 more, and I'm thinking and acting at the speed of light. I'm God. And then 2 more, 1 more, and in the very last moment, with 1 epic movement, I complete the needed lines and hurry to the toilet, and I feel I am God. That's the story. And that story is more important to the player than any story that we can write in advance, because she is the writer. And that's what games are about being the writer, not being the main character as they tell us, but being the writer and the main character too, which is also really great. So the thing is that all these game mechanics help us, are the building blocks of the narrative that the player will tell herself. And we do that, they can be called narremes. A narreme is the basic unit of narrative structure, the building blocks or the atom that make up a narrative, and they can be almost everything. A mechanic can be a narreme. A color or a shape can be an narreme. You're in your Call of Duty-like game, and your health level is going very low, and what happens? The margins, the frame of the screen turns red with blood. This is telling you that you are going to die, and it is creating some emotions of you, and it's telling you, part of the story is, hey, I'm about to die. So if I manage to live, it will be way more epic. I will be creating more. An item or a character, of course. A sound tells you a lot of things more. A word or a sentence, of course. And actions. Everything can help us create this narrative. So, in conclusion, the player, aided by the game and the environment, arranges all these narremes that we give them. The red color, the blue shape, the dinosaur, in a way that they form a story. The other kind of narrative is embedded narrative, which can be also called accidental narrative, because it's not supposed to be there. I mean, you don't need to have it. You can have it, but you don't need it. It's the one that's not necessarily present in all games. Of course, Tetris has no embedded narrative. Just a bit of it. You remember when the Russian guy started to dance? That's a gag. So it's a small narrative within it. And in some versions of Tetris, you could build a rocket. I don't know if you've ever got to the end of that version of Tetris. You can build a rocket and go to the moon. I don't know why, which is completely stupid. I mean, but okay, it's a small reward that I get. So this embedded narrative has been pre-created by the development team, that is us, in a way similar to other genres, to cinema, to novels, to TV, to comic books, in order to provide an emotional reply on the player thanks to intrigue and empathy. And empathy is the opposite of immersion. Empathy is identification. So what happens here is that we have these two narratives together. We have the narrative that the player is creating while she is playing, and the narrative that we have created beforehand in our studio with our people, hiring good game writers like me, and how they relate to each other. So, well, okay, let's go again. Embedded narrative is based on events that are prefabricated packages of naremes. We take the red color, we take this character, and this other character, and the jealousy of this character, and then we put them together and see how jealousy can create a narrative, and then we put some music, and one other nareme is the frame, the kind of shoot that we want to make. We want to make, we want to make a small zoom in, or we want, with all this we create an event. We create a small sequence, let's say, and that's what we give to the audience, let's say, to the viewer of our movie, to the reader of our book. In games, we can do that too with embedded narrative. We create those episodes. The characters in our embedded narrative are seldom the player. Usually, they are characters by themselves. They exist before the player, and the player cannot do a lot about them. They are that way. I mean, you cannot change GLaDOS in Portal. She's that way. And these stories tend to have a beginning, and development, and an ending. But the story that the inherent or emergent narrative doesn't need to have a beginning or a development or anything. It just needs us. And finally, embedded narrative is imposed to the player by us. We are forcing our narratives to them. That is a big problem. Okay, thanks, 10 minutes. What happens here is a clash. We have a player with her own narrative that she's created herself while playing. And then we go and say, hey, but I have another narrative. Please have it. And something must happen. The space, the narrative space is already been occupied by the player. And then we go and try to colonize that space. So a clash happens. What can we do there? Of course, emergent narrative just won't go away. It's there. It's by the player. It's its right to be there. But we want the embedded narrative to be there too, because we want to control some feelings. So the embedded narrative, that means we in our studios, when we are developing the game, must decide, you know, like in the Clash song, if narrative should stay or should go. If it goes away, then we have an Astor game. You know, the Super Hexagon, for example, no narrative, Arkanoid, no narrative, an Astor game, perfect, with only the immersion narrative that the player will create, like in Tetris. But if not, if it stays, then it must adapt. It must find a way to make itself a bit more similar to the narrative created by the player, so she can accept it a bit with less difficulty, let's say. So we must make things a bit less harder. So actually my presentation finishes here, because then we have, this is just the introduction. So the introduction is that we have the clash. And what do we do now? So, wow, we have this game narrative, this space, this narrative space occupied by the player, but we want to make our narrative there. There are some constraints, of course, because we cannot occupy the whole space. We must create ways of inserting our narrative there. The easiest way, the cinematic way. We just put a cinematic here and here and here. And while the player stops being the player, so they do not clash, they do not collide. It's okay. It's been done during decades. Now, it's not all the rage now, only in AAA games and in very cheap games. But we can do it in way more interesting games. We can say, okay, the player will occupy the video part. Immersion narrative will be everything that the player can see. And then we will use sound to communicate the story, the embedded narrative. That is Half-Life or Portal for you. If you turn the volume off, you don't even know there's an embedded story there. Okay, you can read the cake is a lie, but that's all. You don't make any sense of any narrative. But if you turn the volume on, it's a great embedded narrative that is not colliding at all with the other narrative, with the narrative created by the player. So we must find new ways. With Papers, Please, which, as I told you, is my game of last year, the one that I prefer. What they do is that while you are playing, or while you are keeping your eyes busy doing things, with one small corner of your eye, you can read the stories, the small embedded stories. Instead of creating one big, great story, it creates micro stories that do not collide. That just are like small add-ons, like small plugins, like small DLCs that take place at the same time that you're playing. So we must find new ways to do that. But we must acknowledge that we are colonizing the player's territory, so that we are polluting a space. So we must be really, really careful, because everything that we do can fuck up the real great narrative that is the narrative created by the player. So there are some constraints, but at the same time, we have some freedom that no other narrative genre ever has had. Since everything is occupied, and the player is the main character and has a plot made by herself, when we make the embedded narrative in our studio previous to launching the game, do not need to have everything covered. We can create an embedded narrative that does not have a main character. No book can do that. No film can do that. No comic book can do that. Nothing ever can do that. But we can do that because the player is providing the main character in her narrative. We will do our own narrative and won't need that. We can create great characters for a game, and we don't need to provide the plot, because the players will provide the plot. That's absolutely great. We can just create the narrative universe, and we don't even need to create the characters, or don't even need to create a plot, because they will do everything. I don't know if you've played, I think it's Madden, you know, the game, the sports games about American football. No, American, okay, I don't know anything about sports, sorry. So they created an in-game fake Twitter. So what happens is that you are playing and you score a goal, and then you see a small tweet by a real character from the game, from one of the players, from the girlfriend of one of the players, from the trainee, from Jack Nicholson, who happens to like that team. And what the game writers did was they actually created all those characters, but they didn't provide the plot. Because they don't need to. The plot is you playing against the machine or against a friend, and that provides the plot. So I think that that's the real greatness of game narrative, is that we can reinvent the rules. When, I don't know if any of you has gone to any narrative course that they tell you that all stories need to have a main character with a strong objective, and all stories need to have 3 acts. You've heard about the 3-act story. Okay, that's great. We can use 3-act plots. Telltale does it, and it's great. I've done it in many games too. But we don't need to do that. There's no need. If any of you has played The Curse of Monkey Island, and you've liked that plot, yeah, it's great, I love it. But if I analyze it as if it was a cinema narrative, it's crap. I mean, it doesn't follow any of the rules that cinema tell us that are there for sure, that must be there, because we don't need to. In cinema, we have a 30%, no, let's say 25% is the introduction, and 25% is the ending, and then 50% is the development. Okay, in The Curse of Monkey Island, introduction is 60%. Why? But it works, okay, because we don't need to follow that rules, because the player is providing a lot more things. And the embedded narrative, maybe that way, but the immersion narrative that the player will do is way more consistent than that. We must acknowledge that and understand that if we are making a game that's just full of gags, we don't need to follow a rule that if we break it in cinema, we're dead. But in games, we can do that. So please don't let people tell you that because they know how to write a movie, or a TV series, they know how to write games. In order to write games, you don't need to be good at writing words. It's okay if you do. You don't need to be good at telling stories. You just need to be good at understanding how players create stories. And that's what this presentation was all about. So many thanks. Let's keep talking in the bar about this. I don't know if we have time to questions. So.
We'll do 10 minutes of questions.
Okay, that's right.
Yeah, hi. What I want to know about is if the player is creating his own emergent narrative,
so,
how would it...
I'm not understanding you at all, sorry. So let me go there, and then I can hear your real voice.
If the player is creating his own emergent narrative in the game, and how would a game with embedded narrative like Journey or Limbo would be able to communicate easily? Because they don't have the kind of word narration or the sound narration. It's just visual, and the player understands is that. Yeah. So how difficult would it be to do that?
What happens, for example, in Limbo, is that we talk about naremes, these small building blocks that we will build narrative with. So they put the naremes, but they don't arrange